my amazing fifth graders. Welcome to NTI days number 9 and 10. This is your last recording before spring break, so whoop whoop for that. All right, today we have a passage, Civil War Day, Northern Economy. Caption: Destruction of New Orleans Harbor by the Union Navy, April 24th, 1862. About $8 million worth of cotton was destroyed by the South to keep it from falling into Union hands. The Civil War affected the economy in the North and in the South in different ways. The North's economy was better off during the war than the South's was. The North had more factories. Almost 90% of manufactured goods were made in the North. There were more miles of railroad in the North, too. It made it easier to move supplies for the troops. Both of these things would help the North win the war. As the war went on, soldiers needed clothes, shoes, and guns. Factories in the North worked hard to make these items. Some owners made a lot more money through something called profiteering. This is when someone charges a lot of money for an item that someone needs. The government needed clothes and shoes for the soldiers. It was sometimes forced to pay high prices to get what it needed. The North had more railroads than the South. There were about 20,000 miles of railroad in the North. The South only had about 9,000. The Union also had about 96% of railroad equipment. This allowed it to quickly move goods and soldiers around the northern part of the country. But it was the South who, during the first time during the war, moved troops to a battle using the railroad. Both sides struggled to raise money. The war was the most expensive that the country had fought at the time. The government was forced to think of new ways to raise money. One way the Union government did this was to sell bonds. When a person bought a bond, he was lending money to the government. In this case, the money was used to fight the Civil War. The bond was guaranteed to earn a certain amount of interest during the life of the bond. When the bond was matured, the buyer would get the face value of it. The bond can mature at different times. Some mature in months, others take years. Side note, my grandma bought me a bond during World War II or something, and by the time I graduated high school, it was $1,000. So these things are legit, guys. All right, where were we? The government in the North started a national bank to sell the bonds. The people in the North had saved money in banks. This saved money was used to buy bonds. Still, people in the North could not buy enough bonds to pay for the war. Another way that the North raised money was by starting an income tax. This was not popular with the public. Congress started the tax in 1861. The tax was 3% of the money they earned. By 1862, the war was costing more than $2 million a day. Taxes helped pay for some of it, but the income tax did not raise enough money either. In order to get the money that it needed, the North began to print more paper money. This led to inflation. Inflation is when the money is worth less and prices go up. Inflation wasn't as bad in the North as it was in the South. In the South, inflation was 9,000%. Something that cost $1 at the beginning of the war cost about $90 at the end of it. In the North, inflation doubled the price of goods. Much of the war was fought on Southern soil. Because of this, many Southern farms and crops were destroyed. The North did not have this problem. When the war was over, the men could go back to the farms that had been well taken care of. People in the North did not have to worry about rebuilding that part of the country. This helped the North recover quickly from the Civil War. Civil War Day Southern Economy. The Civil War cost more than any other war before it. Both the North and the South had to find ways to raise money. The economy in each part of the country was affected in different ways. The South had a lot of... I feel like I just read this. Nope. The South had a harder time than the North. There weren't a lot of factories in the South. The people in the South depended on their cotton to get what they needed. The South sold cotton to the North and to other countries. The South could then buy what it needed. The war hurt the cotton trade. The North set up a blockade in the waters off the coast of southern ports. This blockade kept ships from leaving. The South had a hard time getting their cotton to other countries to sell. To try get help back to the blockade, to break the blockade, the South refused to sell cotton to the Great Britain. The South hoped that Great Britain would then help break the blockade so it would get more cotton. The South's plan didn't quite work out the way that it had hoped. At the time, there was extra cotton in Great Britain, so the British weren't worried about getting more of it. Britain could buy cotton from other countries. Britain was also against slavery. The country did not want to support the South because the South wanted to keep slavery in place. Thousands of bales of cotton rotted away on southern docks. In order to raise money to fight the war, the Confederate government tried to tax people. Many people in the South did not have enough money to pay taxes. Also, people in the South believed in states' rights. For that reason, some wouldn't pay money to the government. The Confederate government printed more and more money to pay the cost of the war. This led to inflation. Inflation is when the prices rise and money isn't as worth as much. At one point, $60 to $70 in paper equaled $1 in gold. As inflation got worse, prices kept going up. More paper money was needed to buy what the people needed. During a war, the barrel of flour would sell as high as $275, and a pound of butter cost $15. This was if you could find what you were looking for. The blockade made a lot of food and other items hard to find. The Confederate army sometimes had to wait months for clothes or weapons. Many of the weapons came from Europe. The blockade kept them from getting through. To get things like guns, the Southern government tried to start their own factory. Manufacturers were told that their workers would not have to serve in the army if the factory started to make good for the war. The economy in the South was damaged even more when a general from the North, William Sherman, made his march to the sea. During his march, he destroyed much of what was in his path. The South had to struggle for many years to rebuild what it had before the war. The economy in the South took a long time to recover after the Civil War. Short answer. Choose any question and respond using evidence from the text and quotations. Do you think it was okay for a manufacturer to make money through profiteering? Why or why not? Much of the North was not destroyed during the Civil War. Should the North have been forced to help rebuild the South? What would you have done to raise money for the war? Pretend you are living in the South during the war. You can't afford to buy many things in the stores. What else could you do to get the food and supplies you needed?